Good day. Thank you for the invite. Can you hear me? Just check before I continue talking. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's fine. Thank you.
Okay, and you can see the screen, the PowerPoint. Okay, just to make sure. All right. I won't do the introduction. Today's conversation is mostly about the VMV40 subcommittee. Subgroup meetings or working group update, and it's not so much about the VMV40 itself, but I assume there's a prerequisite that you know a bit about VMV40. However, just for the completeness, I'll cover a bit of the topic of VMV40. So VMV40, now called VVUQ40, it's a guide that outlines a framework for making risk-informed determination as to whether CMS is credible for decision-making for a specified context of use. Dr. Bischoff earlier, talked briefly about this, but I just want to show you the framework. It starts with a question of interest. What is the question, the context of use, and that's basically how we're going to make the model. When we make the model, what we expect from the model, and the model risk. This is a bit of a newer concept. And the model credibility, that it's a series of verification and validation activities to assess if the model is credible for that context of use. So briefly, if you look at the framework again, talking about the model risk, model has two parameters: influence and consequence. And once you determine where is your risk matrix, looking at the risk matrix, where your risk is, then you can go through the credibility factors. And the risk is, the way it's the model risk is determined is, per se, the consequence is, what if the model is wrong? Is it has a low consequence to the patient, or a detrimental consequence to the patient, high risk? And the influence is the availability of other sources of information that informs the model. So when it's low, you have maybe closed form solutions, you have clinical data, benchtop data, animal testing to influence the final decision, versus if the computer is the primary source of computational model is the primary source of the evidence. And once you do that, based on where you land, let's say this is your device, then you go through this verification, validation, and applicability activities to determine. First, you set where you need to be based on where you are on that matrix, and then you do appropriate activities. So in 2018, we completed that. We celebrated it. It was done, but we never tried to. At that point, we had very few examples completing the VMV, going through the whole VMV40. So 5 subgroups were formed at that time after 2018 to look at couple of areas that needed maybe more clarification. So we have a working group for that's work on code and calculation verification. I described a little bit better. Personally, and I think we've all done that. We love to go to validation first, because validation is by definition comparing your model to reality, and we typically a lot of times ignore verification. And I can tell you, based on my experience, you should never ignore verification. It's verification. You have to do that as a matter of fact first. And so we talk about that group is working on code and calculation verification. The other part that was missing from the VMV40, if you look at it, there are 6 examples of VMV40, and they cover areas, patchworks, like some will focus on competitor, some maybe on code verification, and some different areas, but we didn't have any problem that was end-to-end. That went through the question of interest all the way to the applicability. And working group 2 does exactly that, end-to-end example application to tibial tray. I'll get to that later. There is another one, the working group 5. This is the inferior vena cava filter. and that's IDE mock submission. That's an FDA initiated working group, and it's the work is very, very important coming out of that group. I will describe that a little bit more. The difference between the two, if you look at your risk profile, the working group 2 identified the influence consequences medium, whereas the working group 5 is really pushing to have a model that replaces or reduces significant amount of testing. So reduces the amount of influence, increase the amount of influence of the model into decision making. And the working group 1 that Jeff Bishop described a bit, it's really focused on 2 things. If you look at the competitor that I was explained in the VMB40, it's control. It's very much a controlled environment, right? It's a testing bench style, have the protocol, you have sample size, you have control over test conditions. It's all about control and measurement. But the real world data, none of that's there, right? It's data coming from explants or imaging, and how does that work with, how does the VMB40 framework can work with that? So they have two working group. One was the real world data, the other was the other side is a patient specific example. So very heavily focused on IMDRF, software as medical device alignment and clinical validation. And working group 6 is really focusing on collecting all that information for a VVUQ standard 2.0. And that will, there's not much to talk about that, except I'll have one slide for that. So I will briefly talk about working group 1 again, because and Jeff Bishop covered some aspects of this work. The goal is to provide guidance on use of real-world data in support of computational modeling for medical devices. And the overall status, we submitted manuscript to Journal of Medical Devices, and we're going through the revisions and the feedback. The overview is a typical tibial tray fracture, which is a reported clinical complication across industry, is used to discussion of using real-world data for assessing model credibility. 4 examples with varying amount of use of real-world presented. So, sorry. Okay. So one of the interesting things about this this one is about the concepts of clinical validation, and explore the concept of clinical validation and calibration. Okay, next, I forgot the leader is Paul Bryan from Exponent. The next one is working group 2, into an example with Brandon Laurie and Sudeep Sastry of the WL Gore. The objective of this, again, as I explained, to employ the entire VVUQ framework on computational model of medical devices. And the example picked was the worst case size for fatigue testing of a tibial tray family of product. It's typical worst case selection. And a draft of this work will be a technical report submitted to ASME. That's in the process of being reviewed. So the question of interest is, does the tibial tray for each size of the new total knee replacement system meet fatigue performance requirement for cyclic loading when one condyle is unsupported? So it's a typical ASTM, I forgot the ASTM standard, I think it was mentioned here, ASTM F2083 standard. So, the context here is the model will be use a static simulation to predict stresses, and based on the predicted stresses, we can rank order and determine what's the worst case. It's, again, as I said, it's a typical worst case selection. But it has a bit of twist. I'm will explain that a little bit later. So the document delves into how to do activities from risk assessment all the way to applicability, and concept discussed in details with application. These are maybe the more of interest to the broader community is risk assessment for a model used to rank order device size for testing instead of making a claim of device safety, and the relation between the quantity of interest for the quantity of and the question of interest. So basically, in this simulation, the validation space is stiffness. And the claim or the context of use is really stress. So if you validate something for deformation, how can you use that to make a claim about the credibility of your stresses? And that's really about the applicability. So a very important aspect of this paper, this work. Next is working group 4. The calculation verification, which I described. Its objective is to explore, learn, and employ calculation verification best practices on representative example problems from the medical devices. So I think we've done nitinol, hip stem, and knee tibial tray, all ASTM, and working on various aspects of best practices from mostly metallic devices. And the working group 3 is working patient-specific modeling, which leads Mark Gooden and Cheryl Liu from Simitech and Stryker. Demonstrate the application of ASME VMB40 to IMDRF guidance. Identify and discuss the challenges of applying the above document to a patient-specific computational model considered as a software as medical device, and assess the level of computational model credibility that needs to be commensurate with the model risk for specific context of use. It's typical clinical. And there are three, since it's a very broad topic, to break that to 3 teams. The first team is looking at really on the alignment between the IMDRF, software as medical device, and VV40 on the context of use and risk assessment. It's led by Kareem Gensh and Synopsys and Jeremy Rawls from Medtronic. Topic team 2 is tiered validation approach. It's led, and Jeff, again, a previous talk, briefly talked about that. It's Julian Klein and Mark Driscoll of Neurologics and McGill University. Topic 3 is IMDRF and BMV40 alignment. It's on the clinical validation and credibility assessment, led by Mark Gooden and Cheryl Liu again. And the example we picked is the femoral bone strength. So I won't get too much into details. It's a lot. The working group 3 is, they're pretty expansive what they're trying to do. But if you look at quickly, if you look at what software as medical device risk framework, you can see how it really somewhat, you can see how you can align with BMV40 risk framework, right? They have a state of healthcare situation or condition that sounds like a risk, that would be the consequence, right? Critical, serious, non-serious, and significance of information provided by SAMD to healthcare decisions. So that's like the model influence. So it's really to the work of this working group is to make that alignment and use that example for tibial for that femur fracture. And determine, go through this process and make the alignment with the SAMD and ASME BMV40. And team 2, as I said, looks at tier validation. I think Jeff Bischoff covered that. And working group 3, team 3 is looking at the clinical validation, writing on in the reporting, writing the reports and documented currently. So maybe the probably one of the more interesting ones is the IBC filter, which aims to which is led by the FDA, and the aim is to generate modeling simulation evidence for experimental data using generic medical device. We call it GENIE. Establish MNS credibility per ASME BMV40, and use FDA guidance to prepare mock regulatory submission to initiate a clinical trial using modeling simulation as a primary source of evidence, as you can see. So it's a primary source of evidence, so model influence is very high. A decision consequence is a 510K. It's a class 2 device for clinical, so the consequence is considered medium. So, and it's going to blind and independent FDA review team evaluates mock submission. So there are 2 mocks, the 2 teams within the FDA. One, it's kind of with the submits this with a group from the companies, and the other team is a reviewer, independent reviewers. So one of the other goals is to assess, improve regulatory review process of modeling guidance documents. And then at the end is distribute the mock submission of software tools. It's going to be a seminal work in terms of, it's going to set the bar for expectations for medium high for these type of work. So the MNS is took for 2 of the most burdensome preclinical bench tests. So it's really trying to replace bench tests in that case for fatigue resistance and for clot trapping. I won't get to detail of that. And status of technical work is fatigue technical works. I mentioned the number of the companies are involved. 2 mock submission teams. Mock submission team 1 prepares and submits mock application, and independent blind FDA review team reviews that. We've gone through the review currently, and for each pair of submission, the 2 pair of submissions I mentioned, we get feedback from the FDA. So the pre-sub 1 is completed. We're going to pre-sub 2, and we haven't started the FDA. So it's fatigue and CFT. You can see structural and fatigue has covered probably the 2 more frequent or more frequent in the domain of modeling simulation technologies. So working 6 is really looking at getting all the feedback from the working groups and from the core community and regulatory and other identified stakeholders to go from 2018 and update the 2022 document. So I have to apologize for going through. There was a lot to cover, but the aim of this is really to hope people, other SME subject matter experts would be involved. We're always looking for a fresh set of eyes. And we would love to have more people involved in working groups. As these working groups wrap their work, we're looking at additional working groups, and we are open to ideas. So to fill the gaps that we think there is, the VVUQ is not able to answer at this point. And thank you very much. Thanks for the slides, are courtesy of the working group leads. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mr. Afshari. You mentioned in your last words that there should be more people active in the working groups, and that fits very well to a question we have from the audience.
Can you hear me?
How can we be part of the working groups and help? So how is the procedure? Do they have to apply, or how does it work?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
You mentioned that you're looking forward to more people be active in the working groups. And the question from the audience is, how can we be part of the working groups and help? Do they have to apply?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I can provide the procedure is typically, you send a request to ASME, but we can provide the secretary who is helping administrating the working groups, help with the signing up. And you have the option of being an interested party, or you can be an active member. Mm-hmm. And based on your participation, then if you're interested, then you will be included in the meetings, and you can start influencing the work we're doing.